I, 35 feuds, was just kicked out of my family home, and I'm in complete shock. I never thought this would happen to me, especially not at this stage in my life. I feel lost, angry, and betrayed. I need advice on how to move forward from here. Let me give you some background. I've always felt like an outsider in my own family. My mother remarried when I was young, and my stepfather has never treated me as his own. My half-sister, who's 6 years older than me, has always been the golden child. Growing up, I constantly felt the sting of favoritism, but I never imagined it would come to this. Yesterday, my mother and stepfather called me into the living room. I could tell something was off by the way they were acting. My mother started by saying, "Honey, we need to talk about something important." My stepfather, as usual, just sat there with a stern look on his face. Then came the bombshell. "Your sister is pregnant," my mother said, her voice filled with excitement. I forced a smile, trying to be happy for my half-sister despite our strained relationship. But what came next knocked the wind out of me. "We need you to move out," my stepfather interjected bluntly. "Your sister and her husband need a place to stay, and we want them to move back in. We need your room." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "But this is my home," I stammered, looking at my mother for support. She avoided my gaze, fidgeting with her wedding ring. "You're 35 now," my mother said softly, still not meeting my eyes. "It's time for you to be independent. Your sister needs our support right now." I felt like I was in a bizarre dream. "But where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I can't just pack up and leave overnight." My stepfather's response was cold and final. "You have a week to figure it out. We need the room ready for your sister by next weekend." I looked at my mother, silently pleading for her to say something, to defend me. But she just sat there, a picture of conflicted emotions. It was clear that once again, my half-sister's needs were being prioritized over mine. I retreated to my room in a daze, my mind racing. How could they do this to me? Sure, I'm an adult, but I've been living here, contributing to the household. I pay rent. I help with chores. It's not like I've been freeloading. And now, with barely any notice, I'm being tossed out like yesterday's garbage. As I sat on my bed, surrounded by the life I've built in this room, memories flooded back. The countless nights I cried silently, feeling like an outsider in my own home. The times I tried to bond with my stepfather, only to be met with indifference. The way my half-sister would smirk when she got preferential treatment. It's always been clear that I wasn't truly part of their real family, but I never thought it would come to this. I've always had a complicated relationship with my mother. She claims to love me just as much as my half-sister, but her actions have never matched her words. Whenever there was a conflict between me and my half-sister, my mother would invariably take her side. When my stepfather was cold or dismissive towards me, my mother would make excuses for him. "He just shows love differently," she'd say, or, "You need to try harder to connect with him." It was always on me to bridge the gap, never on them to meet me halfway. Now, faced with this ultimate betrayal, I'm realizing just how deep this favoritism runs. My half-sister is 41, married, and has a stable job. Why can't she and her husband find their own place? Why am I the one being sacrificed for her comfort? I spent most of the night tossing and turning, my mind a whirlwind of emotions and frantic planning. By morning, I knew I needed help. With shaking hands, I called my best friend, pouring out the whole sordid story through tears and hiccups. My friend was outraged on my behalf. "That's insane," she exclaimed. "They can't just throw you out like that." Her indignation was comforting, validating the anger and hurt I was feeling. Then, she said something that made me break down in gratitude. "Listen, you can stay with me and my family for a while. We have a spare room, and you know my parents adore you." I was overwhelmed by her generosity. It was such a stark contrast to the cold dismissal I'd received from my own family. "Are you sure?" I asked, not wanting to be a burden. "Of course I'm sure," she insisted. "That's what friends are for. We'll help you figure this out." With that lifeline secured, I felt a small measure of relief. At least I wouldn't be homeless. But the emotional toll of this rejection was still crushing. How do you process being discarded by your own family? As I started to pack up my belongings, each item I touched brought a new wave of memories and emotions. The framed photo of my college graduation, where my mother's proud smile didn't quite reach her eyes, because my half-sister had announced her engagement the same week. The handmade quilt from my grandmother, one of the few family members who always made me feel loved and accepted. The collection of books that had been my escape when the tension in the house became unbearable. I realized that in many ways, I'd been preparing for this moment my whole life. I'd always felt like a temporary resident in this houses, never truly at home. But actually, facing the reality of leaving was harder than I'd ever imagined. As I was packing, my mother knocked on the door. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she'd come to her senses. Maybe she was going to stand up for me. But as soon as she started speaking, that hope was extinguished. "I know this is hard for you," she began, her voice soft but firm. "But you need to understand that family has to come first." The irony of her words hit me like a slap. "Aren't I family too?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Of course you are, honey. But your sister is in a delicate condition. She needs extra support right now." I couldn't hold back anymore. "And what about my needs? When have they ever come first? When have I ever been chosen over her?" My mother's face hardened. "That's not fair. We've always treated you both equally." I laughed bitterly. "Equally? Is that why I'm the one being kicked out? Is that why stepdad has never shown me an ounce of affection? Is that why you always take her side?" "That's enough," my mother snapped. "I'm not going to stand here and be accused of being a bad mother. You're an adult now. It's time you started acting like one." With that, she turned and left, closing the door firmly behind her. I stood there, shaking with anger and hurt. It was clear that no matter what I said, they would never see how unfairly they've treated me. As the week progressed, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly tense. My stepfather barely acknowledged my existence, while my mother alternated between guilt-ridden glances and frustrated sighs. My half-sister called once, her voice syrupy sweet, as she thanked me for understanding and promised to take good care of my old room. I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming at her. The day before I was set to leave, I overheard my mother and stepfather talking in hushed tones in the kitchen. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but when I heard my name, I couldn't help but linger by the door. "I feel terrible about this," my mother was saying. "Maybe we should give her more time." My stepfather's response was swift and cold. "She's had plenty of time. She needs to learn to stand on her own 2 feet. We can't coddle her forever." "But she's my daughter," my mother protested weakly. "And half-sister's name is your daughter too," he retorted. "She's the one who needs us now. My name will be fine. She's always been independent anyway." I slipped away before they could catch me, my heart heavy. It was clear that my stepfather was the driving force behind this decision, but my mother's weak defense of me was almost worse than no defense at all. On my last night in the house, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling I've looked at for so many years. I thought about all the times I'd dreamed of escaping this house, of building a life where I felt truly accepted and loved. Now that it was happening, albeit not on my terms, I felt a strange mix of terror and excitement. The next morning, as I loaded the last of my boxes into my friend's car, my mother came out to say goodbye. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and for a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy for her. But then I remembered all the times she'd chosen my half-sister over me, all the times she'd failed to protect me from my stepfather's coldness. "I hope you'll understand someday," she said, reaching out to hug me. I stood stiffly in her embrace, not returning it. "We'll always be here if you need us." I couldn't help but laugh at that. "Really? Because it seems like you're only here for her, not for me." My mother flinched as if I'd slapped her. "That's not true. I love you both equally. Actions speak louder than words, Mom," I said, turning away from her to get into the car. "I hope someday you'll understand that." As we drove away, I watched my childhood home recede in the rearview mirror. I felt a complex mix of emotions: grief, anger, relief, and a glimmer of hope. This wasn't how I'd imagined starting the next chapter of my life, but maybe, just maybe, it was the push I needed. Over the next few weeks, as I settled into my friend's spare room, I started to take stock of my life. At 35, I was essentially starting over. It was terrifying, but also strangely liberating. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to consider my family's expectations or judgments. I could forge my own path. I started researching college programs. I'd always wanted to go back to school, but the timing never seemed right. Now, with my life upended, it felt like the perfect opportunity to pursue that dream. I spent hours poring over course catalogs, imagining a future where I had a career I was passionate about. But the practicalities of this new life were daunting. How would I afford tuition? Could I balance work and study? And always, in the back of my mind, was the hurt and anger at my family's betrayal. My friend and her family were incredibly supportive. They insisted I stay as long as I needed, refusing to accept rent even when I offered. "Consider it an investment in your future," my friend's mother said warmly. Their kindness was a balm to my wounded heart, showing me what true family support looked like. As the days turned into weeks, I threw myself into planning my future. I applied for scholarships, reached out to academic advisors, and started looking for part-time jobs that could accommodate a student's schedule. It was exhausting and often disheartening work, but it gave me a sense of purpose. One evening, as I was hunched over my laptop, drowning in scholarship applications, my friend sat down next to me. "How are you really doing?" she asked gently. I paused, considering the question. "I'm okay," I said slowly. "I'm angry and hurt, and some days I can barely get out of bed. But other days, I feel almost excited about the future." "Is that weird?" She shook her head. "Not at all. You're grieving the family you deserved, but never had. But you're also finally free to build the life you want. Both those things can be true at the same time." Her words hit home. I was grieving, not just the loss of my home, but the loss of the family I'd always hoped we could be. At the same time, I was starting to envision a future where I wasn't constantly seeking approval from people who would never truly accept me. As I worked on rebuilding my life, I couldn't help but reflect on the patterns that had led to this point. My family's dysfunction hadn't appeared overnight. It was the result of years of unaddressed issues, of favoritism left unchecked, of a stepfather's coldness never confronted, of a mother's inability to stand up for her child. I thought about reaching out to a therapist. The weight of my family's rejection was heavy, and I knew I needed help processing it all. But therapy was expensive, and with my future so uncertain, I wasn't sure I could afford it. Still, I made a mental note to look into low-cost options. I knew that if I wanted to break the cycle of dysfunction, I needed to address my own emotional wounds. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, I began to find my footing. I was accepted into a local community college's nursing program with a partial scholarship that eased some of the financial burden. I found a job as a night shift receptionist at a nearby hotel, which allowed me to attend classes during the day. My life was busy and often exhausting, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving forward. My family, meanwhile, remained largely silent. My mother sent a few text messages, mostly generic, "hope you're doing well" type messages that I struggled to respond to. My half-sister, now heavily pregnant, sent a smug announcement about her baby shower. I didn't respond. My stepfather, unsurprisingly, made no attempt to contact me at all. Their silence was both a relief and a new kind of pain. On one hand, I was glad to be free of their judgment and the constant feeling of not measuring up. On the other hand, their ability to just move on with their lives, seemingly unbothered by my absence, was a fresh wound. But as I immersed myself in my studies and my new life, I found that the pain began to dull. It didn't disappear. I doubted it ever would completely, but it became more manageable. I was building a life on my own terms, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me. It wasn't the life I had imagined for myself, but I was starting to think it might be better. As I approach the end of my first semester of college, I find myself at a crossroads. Part of me wants to cut all ties with my family, to leave that chapter of my life firmly in the past. Another part of me wonders if there's any hope for reconciliation, if time and distance might allow for healing. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I do know this: I'm stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. I've survived being cast out by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I'm building a new life, pursuing my dreams, and surrounding myself with genuine love and support. To anyone out there facing a similar situation, know this: family is more than blood. Sometimes, the family we choose is far more nurturing than the one we're born into. It's okay to prioritize your own well-being, to set boundaries, and to seek out the love and support you deserve. I don't know if I'll ever fully heal from my family's betrayal, but I do know that I'm on a path to a better life, one where I'm valued and respected. And for now, that's enough. Am I wrong for feeling this way? Should I try to mend fences with my family? Or am I better off focusing on my new life? Any advice would be appreciated as I navigate this complicated situation. Update 1. It's been 2 months since my last post, and I have some shocking updates to share. First, I want to thank everyone for their supportive comments. Your words gave me strength during a really dark time. About 3 weeks ago, I received an unexpected call from my grandparents. Yes, the same grandparents I thought had abandoned my mother years ago. They asked to meet, saying they had recently learned about my situation. What they told me during our meeting shook everything I thought I knew about my family. The story my mother had always told me, that her parents cut her off when she got pregnant with my half-sister, was completely false. In reality, my grandparents had been supportive of the pregnancy. What they opposed was my mother's relationship with my stepfather, who apparently had a history of substance abuse. They had given my mother an ultimatum: they would support her through the pregnancy and after, but only if she broke up with my stepfather. My mother chose him over their support, and that's when the rift began. But here's the kicker: the houses I was kicked out of, it was actually purchased by my grandparents years ago, in an attempt to reconcile with my mother. They bought it, hoping it would bring the family back together. Instead, my mother took the houses, but continued to shut them out. Everything I thought I knew about my family history was a lie. The grandparents I'd been told didn't want me had actually been trying to connect with me for years, but my mother had intercepted their attempts. Then my grandparents dropped another bombshell. They told me they were planning to evict my mother, stepfather, and half-sister from the house. "It's legally our property," my grandfather explained, "and we've decided it's time to reclaim it." But they left the final decision to me. If I wanted my family to stay, if I thought there was a chance for reconciliation, they wouldn't go through with the eviction. I felt like I was in a surreal dream. Here I was, suddenly handed the power to make the same decision that had been made about me just months ago. The irony was almost too much to bear. I asked for time to think about it. Over the next few days, I grappled with this decision. I talked it over with my friend and her family, who advised me to think carefully about what I truly wanted, not just what my hurt and anger were pushing me towards. I thought about my mother, my stepfather, my half-sister. I thought about years of feeling less than, of walking on eggshells in my own home. I thought about the callousness with which they had thrown me out, prioritizing my half-sister's comfort over my basic need for a home. After much soul-searching, I made my decision. I called my grandparents and told them to go ahead with the eviction. It wasn't an easy choice, and I'm still not sure if it's the right one. But I realized that my family had made their choice long ago. They had chosen my half-sister over me, time and time again. Perhaps this was the wake-up call they needed. My grandparents respected my decision. They've started the legal process of eviction, which apparently takes some time. They've also invited me to stay with them once the house is vacant, an offer I'm considering. I haven't told my mother or the rest of the family about my involvement in this decision. As far as they know, my grandparents are acting independently. Part of me feels guilty, but a larger part feels a sense of justice being served. I'm still processing all of these revelations and decisions. My emotions are all over the place: anger, sadness, a bit of satisfaction, and a lot of confusion. I'm grateful for my grandparents' honesty and their desire to build a relationship with me, but I'm also wary. After all, I thought I could trust my mother, and look how that turned out. For now, I'm focusing on my studies and my job. I'm seeing a therapist to help me work through all of this, which has been incredibly helpful. I'm taking things one day at a time, trying to build a life that's truly mine. I guess life really can change in an instant. 2 months ago, I felt alone and discarded. Now, I have grandparents who want to be in my life, and I'm the one making decisions about my family's living situation. It's a lot to take in. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm cautiously optimistic. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I have some control over my life and my relationships. It's scary, but it's also empowering. Thank you all again for your support. I'll update again when there are new developments. Any advice on how to navigate this new family dynamic would be greatly appreciated. Update 2. It's been about a month since my last update, and a lot has happened. I want to thank everyone again for their support and advice. It's been incredibly helpful during this challenging time. First, let me address the biggest development: the eviction of my family from the house. As I mentioned in my last update, my grandparents started the legal process to reclaim their property. Well, it's official now. My mother, stepfather, and half-sister have been given a month's notice to vacate the premises. I've been keeping my distance from the situation, but my friend, who still lives in the neighborhood, has kept me informed. Apparently, there's been a lot of commotion at the house. My half-sister and her husband have been seen moving boxes in and out, and there have been heated arguments on the front lawn. It's surreal to think about the chaos unfolding in the place I once called home. The most difficult part of this whole situation came a few days ago when I received an email from my mother. I had been bracing myself for some kind of response from her, but nothing could have prepared me for the vitriol in her message. The email was filled with hurtful statements and accusations. She called me ungrateful, saying things like, "I should have known you'd turn out like this. You were always a difficult child." She even went as far as to say she wished she had never given birth to me, and that she hoped I would rot in hell for what I've done to the family. Reading those words from my own mother, I can't even describe how it felt. It was like a physical blow. I always knew our relationship was strained, but I never imagined she harbored such deep-seated resentment towards me. In a twisted way, though, her email provided a kind of closure. It confirmed what I had felt for years, but had always tried to deny. My mother never truly loved me, at least not in the way a mother should. It was painful to face this truth, but it also felt liberating. I no longer have to hold on to the hope of winning her approval or love. As for my stepfather and half-sister, they haven't reached out at all. Their silence speaks volumes. It's clear that I was never truly part of their family unit, just an inconvenient addition they had to tolerate. Despite the emotional turmoil, I'm doing my best to focus on my future. My studies are going well, and I'm finding my nursing classes incredibly fulfilling. It's gratifying to know that I'm working towards a career where I can make a real difference in people's lives. My relationship with my grandparents is slowly developing. We've been having weekly video calls, and they've been sharing old family stories and photos. It's bittersweet to learn about this side of my family that I was kept from for so long, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to connect with them now. They've renewed their offer for me to live with them once the house is vacated. I'm seriously considering it. The idea of living in that house again, with all its memories, is daunting. But there's also something poetic about reclaiming the space and making it my own. My therapist has been invaluable in helping me process all of this. We've been working on setting boundaries and dealing with the complex emotions I'm experiencing. It's a long journey, but I feel like I'm making progress. One thing that's become clear to me through all of this is the importance of chosen family. My friend and her parents have been my rock throughout this ordeal. Their unwavering support has shown me what true family love looks like. It's made me realize that family isn't just about blood relations, but about the people who stand by you and support you unconditionally. As I look to the future, I feel a mix of emotions. There's sadness for the family relationships I've lost, anger at the years of mistreatment, anxiety about the uncertain future, but also hope. Hope for the new relationships I'm building, hope for the career I'm working towards, and hope for the person I'm becoming. I know the road ahead won't be easy. There will likely be more fallout from the eviction, and I'm prepared for potential confrontations with my family members. But for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm standing on solid ground. I'm making decisions for myself, prioritizing my own well-being, and surrounding myself with people who genuinely care about me. To anyone out there facing similar family struggles, know that you're not alone. It's okay to prioritize your own mental health and happiness, even if it means making difficult decisions about family relationships. You deserve love, respect, and support. Thank you all again for your kindness and advice. Your support has meant more to me than you could know. I'll update again if there are any significant developments. In the meantime, any advice on how to continue healing and moving forward would be greatly appreciated. Update 3. It's been 6 months since my last update, and I'm writing this from my old bedroom in what is now my grandparents' house. So much has changed, and I'm still adjusting to this new reality. As planned, my mother, stepfather, and half-sister moved out of the house. It wasn't smooth. There were dramatic scenes, including them trying to take appliances that didn't belong to them. My grandparents handled most of it, sparing me from direct confrontation. After they left, my grandparents renovated the place and invited me to move back in. It felt strange at first, but I decided to take their offer. My old bedroom had been repainted and refurnished, a clean slate, just like this new chapter in my life. Living with my grandparents has been an adjustment, but mostly positive. They respect my independence while providing support I've never experienced before. We're slowly building a relationship, sharing meals, and learning about each other's lives. It's bittersweet, thinking about the years we missed, but I'm grateful for this opportunity to connect now. The holidays were significant this year. For the first time, I celebrated Thanksgiving in this house without the usual tension and anxiety. My grandparents invited my best friend and her family, who have been my support system throughout this ordeal. As we sat around the table, laughing and sharing stories, I felt a warmth I'd never associated with this house before. It wasn't perfect. There were moments when the absence of my mother and the rest of the family felt palpable, but it was genuine and loving. I've had no contact with my mother, stepfather, or half-sister since they moved out. I know my half-sister had her baby, making me an aunt to a child I'll probably never meet. Sometimes I feel sad about that, but mostly I'm at peace with the distance. My studies are going well. I'm set to graduate from my nursing program next year, and I've started looking into job opportunities. My grandparents have been incredibly supportive, both emotionally and financially, even offering to help with my student loans. Therapy continues to be crucial. I've been working through my feelings about my mother's rejection, the years of emotional neglect, and the complex emotions that come with essentially starting a new family with my grandparents. It's not always easy, but I can see the progress I'm making. One of the most significant changes has been in how I view myself. For so long, I defined myself by my family's perception of me, the unwanted child, the burden. Now, I'm learning to see myself through my own eyes and the eyes of people who genuinely care about me. I'm rediscovering my worth, my strengths, and my potential. I've also been thinking about forgiveness, not in terms of reconciling with my mother and stepfather, but in letting go of the anger and resentment I've carried for so long. It's a process, and some days are harder than others, but I'm working on it. Looking to the future, I feel hopeful. I'm excited about my career prospects, grateful for my new relationships, and proud of my personal growth. There's still uncertainty, but for the first time, I feel equipped to handle whatever comes my way. To anyone struggling with family issues or feeling trapped in toxic relationships, please know that it's never too late to prioritize your own well-being. It's not easy to break away from familial expectations and forge your own path, but it's possible. Surround yourself with supportive people, seek professional help if you can, and be patient with yourself as you heal. Thank you to everyone who has offered advice, shared their own stories, or sent words of encouragement. Your support has meant more than you could know. This will likely be my last update. While I'm sure there will be more challenges ahead, I feel like I've closed this chapter of my life. I'm no longer the lost, rejected daughter, desperately seeking approval. I'm a strong, independent woman with a bright future ahead, surrounded by people who genuinely love and support me. Thank you all, from the bottom of my heart.